Everybody to navigating 340B contract pharmacy restrictions, the latest developments, field insights, mitigation efforts. We're going to wait just maybe one more minute to let everybody come in since you guys are just getting in, and then we will get started.
Okay, I think I'm going to start this off. I'm kind of a punctual person, so it's itching at me that we're starting at 1:02 right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started. I know we still see some people following their ways in, but welcome to Ravin's first ever hosted webinar. And I am elated to say that we had 513 of you wonderful people from across the United States of America sign up for this. So welcome to Navigating 340B Contract Pharmacy Restrictions. A little bit about myself is that I have been in the accounting industry, the operations industry of medical field for going on 23 years now. I've been in C-suite for going on 15 years, and I've been in the 340B program since 2010, when, like many of you, it was kind of plopped onto my desk and said, figure it out. And I did. I worked at the time as a CFO at a small aid service organization, and we were able to grow massively into the 340B program to the point where in 2017, I said, maybe I can do this for several other organizations. So I founded Ravin Consultants in 2017 to help all the other organizations around the country really get into this program that they should be in, that they should know how to be compliant in, that they should also know how to optimize to make more money in their organization for their patients and even their staff. So we are 15 Ravineers strong. We call ourselves Ravineers instead of staff members or team members or any other names that other people use. But we say that because we are the pioneers of some of the elements of 340B. We really feel that we've pioneered our way towards finding eligibility for those that really should have it, for those that have eligibility and just don't know the next step in 340B, for those that are implementing items such as their prime vendor program or their contracted pharmacies or an on-site pharmacy or recertification. Then, of course, we do the compliance bucket, which is your data request list from the Bizel and HRSA group. So we do those mock audits, of course, but then our favorite tier in Ravin Consultants is the optimization tier. Our optimization tier is made up of numerous departments. So in Ravin, unlike a lot of other consulting agencies, we actually have on-site marketing. Why do we do that? Well, they have these amazing webinars for us first and foremost and conferences, but they also work with our clients. So they bring in our marketing team and they say, how can we help you with flyers in your waiting room about your pharmacies? How can we make you pamphlets on trying to get more patients into your organization? We also have on-site human resources, which I know many don't have, but we have our human resources team also help create job postings, job descriptions, SMART goals, training, onboarding. We do the same thing with IT, with your EMRs, with accounting to help you with forecasts and budgets, and all the other departments to help optimize your program. We need to start in the 340B program moving along with compliance with optimization. And I know it's been a buzzword in 340B since manufacturers restrictions started back in the COVID times, but we really need to start looking past that and saying, okay, how do I optimize my program in compliance? So you're going to be hearing a lot of those things today with regards to optimizing your 340B program and where we are with contract pharmacies. But first, before I let you know a little bit more of the agenda of what we're doing today in our contract pharmacy restrictions, I would love to hear Rob and Ted brag about themselves as well. So I'll give it to you, Rob.
Hey, thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. I'm so excited to be here speaking with you all. My name is Robert Ferraro. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with Ravin. I've been with Ravin coming up on 5 years. Next month will be my 5-year Ravin anniversary. Super excited about that. Time does fly when you're having fun. Although every time I do one of these intros, I'm like, has it been that long? Have I been in pharmacy for 20 years? That seems crazy to me, but here I am. Now I've been in 340B now for over the last 10 years, 5 of those with Ravin. Prior to that, I worked in various 340B settings, including at a dish entity, as well as on the contract pharmacy side of things. I love the work that we do. I love working with covered entities and helping y'all achieve your missions and seeing your real life stories of your patients. So thanks again for attending. And now we can kick that over to Ted.
Oh.
Ted, I think you're muted.
Oh, but yes, I think you are muted, Mr. Ted. Let's see. No.
How about down the bottom there, Ted? You appear to be muted still. Should be under the slides, a little button.
I will let you know when you kick in. I'm going to skip over one intro. Actually, I could probably introduce you and brag more about you than you can because everyone doesn't like to talk about themselves. But let me talk about him while he tries to figure this out with Miss Deanna. You got to love some of these IT technical glitches. We asked Ted to be on this webinar today because he knows everything and anything about advocacy and litigation within the 340B world. I don't know about you, but before Ted and his wonderful, beautiful wife, Diane, came up with 340B reports, I used to have a Google alert on my Gmail that had anything with 340B would come up so I would be in the know. Well, I don't know about all of you, but I know everything about Saab 340B airliner planes now because I also got those Google alerts. And ever since 340B report came to fruition in the 340B world, I was able to stop those 340B Google alerts because Ted's information always came in faster than anyone else's. So having 340B report has been a godsend with regards to Ravin consultants and helping all of our clients, as well as so many other subscribers. So it's definitely something that you should look into if you haven't already. And I'm going to go ahead and skip on forward. So today we're going to be talking about navigating your 340B contract pharmacies, as we said. So the first up, which it might end up being last up, pending what we can do with Ted's speaker, is the advocacy and litigation. So if you guys have not been changing your 340B program over the last several years, since COVID, when the manufacturer's restrictions really started, then you are already probably seeing that massive, significant revenue decrease. There are absolutely ways to go around all of this. And today we were hoping to be able to assist you and your team to at least brainstorm some of these various topics that we're going to bring up to you. You're going to hear a lot of buzzwords. And at that point, it would be great for you to take those words to your executive team and say, this is something that I think we should try out. And if your executive team and you are unsure of how to get to that next step, that's when you can go to consultants like us or 340B report for a recommendation, and hopefully that we can help you in that way. Also moving on, then we're going to have our Ravineer Rob talking about 340B challenges. So he's going to give you some real life 340B stories since we live and breathe 340B every single day. I assume a lot of you out there have multiple hats that you wear. You mean you're replenishing, you're analyzing, then you're maybe even doing HR on the side. I mean, I've heard it, I've seen it. I've been in small grantees, I've been in large grantees, I've been with hospitals, so I've seen it all. But he's going to give you some of those real life stories that we see every single day out there. And again, take some of those buzzwords and take them to brainstorm with your executive team. So the advocacy, litigation, and 340B challenge I like to see as the past. So then we also want to look into the future with mitigation strategies. What can you do to get past all these manufacturers' restrictions? And it's like, why are we even still having these conversations of manufacturers' restrictions, even though they started 4 years ago? That's because they're still occurring. Johnson & Johnson just came out with a new one. I'm sure you all have heard of that, and if you haven't, you're going to hear about it in here. So it's still happening on a weekly basis of all these changes with manufacturers' restrictions. So what is the best way to navigate that going forward? And he's going to give you some of those mitigation strategies. And last but not least, the alternative distribution models. Do you have that on-site pharmacy? Do you use and utilize ESP? Are you capturing those referrals, and so much more? So we're going to be looking at the past, advocacy and litigation, 340B challenges, and then the future with mitigation strategies and alternative distribution models. Ted, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, well, I bragged about you and your wonderful company.
Oh, good,
So
good,
you
good.
are on now for your portion.
Oh, great job, Jen. Very impressive. I was just about, when I began speaking, I was talking about my connection to Rob and where we both grew up, Little Rhodey, the smallest state in the Union, the Ocean State. So maybe someone didn't like that and decided to mute me, someone from Massachusetts or Connecticut. But, you know, hey, so glad to be back. And thank you for your help there, Deanna. Okay, great. So as you probably all know, the topic that actually is on everyone's minds right now is the Johnson & Johnson proposed rebate model. As you may have heard, Johnson & Johnson has informed hospitals that they wanted to start using a rebate model for two of their most pricey drugs. This kind of shocked the 340B community when Johnson & Johnson sent this alert to all the disproportionate share hospitals in the country. And to HRSA's credit, they've been very aggressive in telling Johnson & Johnson no. In fact, there was a letter that came out just yesterday from HRSA warning Johnson & Johnson that they will start to impose civil monetary penalties against the drug manufacturer and potentially terminate their PPA agreement with the HHS secretary. That's the contract between the government and drug manufacturers that gives them access to both the Medicaid and Medicare Part B programs, two of the biggest drug markets in the world. So I would say that those in the provider community are very pleased to hear that HRSA is taking this very seriously. And I think that the chances of this model going through are greatly diminished, largely due to the work of the federal government, but also due to the fact that the law is on HRSA's side here. All the attorneys that I've talked to feel that they have a very strong case here in saying that only a rebate model is only optional when the HHS secretary has approved the model, and that has not happened in this case. So there is a situation with ADAPs when they use the rebate model, but that makes sense for that unique circumstance. I'm going to go on to my next slide. I'm going to talk a lot today about the various activities at the state level. There's been a lot of success at the state level in introducing and in some places enacting laws that are restoring 340B pricing in the contract pharmacy setting. We now have 8 states that have approved laws that will require drug manufacturers to provide 340B pricing in the contract pharmacy setting, with Arkansas being the first in the country and the one that has been made the most progress so far. But 7 other states, 6 of them in what are called red states, conservative states, and 2 in blue states so far. I'm expecting a lot of action in the coming months as other states try to enact similar legislation. The one challenge has been the efforts, particularly in the red states, by a dark money organization that's spending a lot of money trying to scare lawmakers into not supporting the 340B program. Somehow they're trying to make a tie between the 340B program and how it's a draw for immigrants to come over the borders. Now, we all know that immigrants aren't rushing to the US to get 340B pricing on their drugs, but nonetheless, it's actually had a fairly powerful impact in some states. and has given pause to some conservative legislatures on moving forward on this legislation. Not only are there efforts through public relations and media efforts to try to stop these laws, there's also been an effort by the drug industry to stop these new state laws through litigation. There are suits against all 8 states that have enacted these laws from the pharmaceutical industry. So far, the 340B provider community and the government that has been acting on their behalf has been successful in stopping these litigation attempts, and none of the laws have been blocked. In fact, a number of them have gotten to the point where they can go forward in all capacity. The biggest example would be Arkansas, where the federal appeals court in St. Louis, in a 3-0 decision, determined that the law is perfectly permissible. As a result, Arkansas has made a lot of progress in getting virtually every drug company in the country to restore discounts. Other states have been a little bit slower because their laws were passed afterwards. Just recently, Johnson & Johnson, of all drug manufacturers, relented, and they are now providing 340B pricing in the state of Arkansas. Other drug companies have slowly started to offer 340B pricing to more and more of the states that have passed the laws. And there have been, so far, all of the federal courts that have looked at this in the various jurisdictions have blessed the contract pharmacy laws. We have a really nice tracking device that's available on the 340B report website for those who are subscribers that will provides information on every drug company that's offering 340B pricing once again in those states, and what is the the extent of the restoration of the discounts. Oops. Meanwhile, in Washington, things are moving a little bit more slowly. No shocker, it's an election year. There are a number of 340B bills that have been introduced, and a couple of them are starting to get a little bit of momentum. I'll start with the 340B Patients Act, which is the second bill in my slides. You see there, that's a bill that would just simply restore 340B pricing in the contract pharmacy setting. It's a very simple law focused on that particular issue. Doris Matsui, a Democrat from California, has introduced a bill in the House. And then there's a companion bill that Senator Peter Welch, a Democrat from Vermont, has just recently introduced in the United States Senate. And that is gaining co-sponsors, and one that the provider community is very supportive of. There's another bill called the 340B Access Act. That's a bill that was introduced by 3 Republican lawmakers with the support of both pharma and the National Association of Community Health Centers. That would restore pricing in the contract pharmacy setting, but just for health centers and other grantees. It would also place significant restrictions on access to 340B pricing, particularly for hospitals. Most hospitals would lose eligibility for 340B pricing for everyone but their uninsured patients. And they would also not have significant access to the contract pharmacy pricing. So that is and one other element of that bill that has raised concerns is that it would terminate the state laws that have already been enacted that allow full access to 340B pricing. So that bill has not gotten much traction at all. There's another bill called the 340B Protect Act that's focused on the issue of trying to prohibit PBMs from discriminating against 340B covered entities by lowering prices to them or making other types of rules that are in place just because of pharmacies in the 340B program. It's basically a national version of the many laws that have passed in various states giving 340B providers protections from PBMs. There are also a number of 340B provider reporting bills that have made some progress on Capitol Hill that would require providers to provide more details on how they're using their 340B savings, or provide more details on the revenue they're bringing in. But it's unclear whether any of those will actually make it to the finish line before Congress adjourns for the year. In the House, we have an interesting situation where the Republicans have a slight control over the chamber. Kathy McMorris Rodgers chairs the Committee of Jurisdiction over the 340B program, and that's the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And then we have Frank Pallone from New Jersey, who's the ranking Democrat on the committee. Kathy McMorris Rodgers is going to be retiring from Congress. It looks like there's a decent chance that the Democrats will take back control of the House, but it's still unclear. It's a very tight race right now. But if the Democrats take control, Representative Pallone, who's been a friend of the 340B program, will become chair again. The GOP generally, while there are some good, strong supporters of the program in the caucus, there are a number of Republican members that have been much more friendly to the drug industry, which has caused some angst and consternation for the 340B provider community. In the Senate, we have a different situation. It looks like there's a good chance that the Republicans will take control of that chamber. The chamber is currently under the control of the Democrats by a very narrow 51-49 vote. But the Democrats have a lot more folks who are up for election this year than the Republicans. In the Senate, only 1/3 of the lawmakers are actually up for election, unlike the House, where the entire chamber is up for election. So the map doesn't look great for the Democrats. They could lose control, and they could lose control by just 1 or 2 votes. But even if that happens, you're going to see a much different view of the 340B program. Senator Sanders is, as you probably all know, has been very tough on the drug industry and hasn't done any favors for the drug industry. And while he has been fairly quiet on the 340B program, he has done a good job of trying to block some amendments that would be problematic to the 340B provider community. Senator Cassidy from Louisiana would likely be the next chair of the committee if the Republicans take over. Senator Cassidy has been critical of the 340B program and has actually launched an investigation into how 340B providers are utilizing the program. And I expect his investigation and his efforts to try to put more restrictions on the program will continue in the next chamber, regardless of whether he's the chair or ranking member. But if he's the chair, he'll have subpoena power, and he will be even more involved in trying to make changes to 340B. As Jen was kind enough to say, 340B report is a great publication. It is a great way to stay on top of all the developments in the 340B program. We publish twice a week, and when breaking news happens, we have a tremendous amount of experience with the 340B program. I started my career as a journalist at U.S. News and World Report, and then led 340B Health as the president and CEO for many years. And now I'm back in journalism. I think you'd really benefit from becoming a subscriber. I know many of you on this webinar are already subscribers, but if you are not, or if you have colleagues that are not, I encourage you to get the word out. And we have a special discount available for those who are participating in the webinar today. If you use the code RAVIN25, you can get a 25% discount on subscribing. And I want to thank Ravin for being a longtime sponsor of 340B Report. It's quite helpful to us. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rob.
Thanks, Ted. Great job. We're going to now dive into some of the 340B manufacturer restrictions, what they look like, and talk about some of the different ways that covered entities are mitigating their impact. Obviously, we are not going to go through every thing on this slide here. This is more just for those that want to print this out or save this when you get the PowerPoint after this. It's a list of all the current manufacturer restrictions and current at the time of writing, which was August 1st. So we've just got the manufacturer, the policy overview, whether or not there are geographic restrictions in the policy, whether or not there are data submission requirements, and then any other notable details. So again, this is not meant for us to go through. It's just meant to have for those of you that want it after the fact. So there's different types of restrictions that manufacturers are imposing. We're breaking them down today into 3 categories. That would be geographic proximity requirements, data submission and transparency requirements. And then we'll talk about some of the entity-owned pharmacy considerations that impact the manufacturer restrictions. So first up, we've got, again, the geographic proximity restrictions. I think most people, if you're in 340B and you're on this call, probably are aware that there are now more geographic restrictions than there were when restrictions first started. When the manufacturers first started rolling these out, there weren't necessarily these limitations on where your pharmacies were. Now, however, they have tightened the noose a little bit, and most of them are saying now you have to have your covered entity that you select within 40 miles of your parent site of your entity. You know, why do they do that? They say they want to minimize the risk of drug diversion and make sure that, you know, your 340B drugs are going to eligible patients. Okay, on paper, fine, that makes sense. In practice, I think we all would disagree. For example, rural communities where patients are driving 40, 50, 60 miles to come to your entity, they might prefer to use a pharmacy in their hometown. And if that's more than 40 miles away, then they have no chance of doing that. The same would apply for telehealth. If your entity is using telehealth to see patients that are not geographically close to you, the same applies. They may have pharmacies in their hometowns that they prefer to use, but that wouldn't even be an option for you to select as a covered entity with these geographical restrictions. So we're going to talk about ways to get around this in the future. Again, during this first part here, we're going to talk about what the restrictions are. And the second half, we'll talk about how to mitigate some of them. And please don't forget to drop any questions in the chat so we can get to them later on. We're going to try to end with about 10 or 15 minutes so we can have some time for Q&A. The next restriction type would be around data submission and transparency. Again, when this first came out, this was more of an optional thing. Entities may or may not have opted in to submit data. I'd say when this first came about, we were seeing probably less than a third of covered entities voluntarily opting in to submit their data. Now, here we are a few years later, and covered entities are in some cases bleeding money from this. We probably are seeing more than 75% of covered entities now are reporting data. It's a tricky thing to try to figure out whether or not you want to do it. We don't know exactly what this data is used for. Manufacturers will say that they're using it to verify program eligibility and to combat potential abuses. Again, okay, on paper, maybe that makes sense. However, it's not really the manufacturer's job to verify patient eligibility. That role resides with the covered entity. Covered entities are ultimately responsible for making sure they're using the program appropriately. They're audited by HRSA and by manufacturers if selected. And that should be sufficient enough where we don't need to submit data. But unfortunately, this is the state of 340B right now. And again, we'll talk about some considerations about what it means to submit data. It certainly can be labor intensive. The manual pulling of the data and the oversight of the 340B ESP portal can all be pretty labor intensive and a bit technical. But again, we'll talk about that a bit more on the latter half of this presentation. Next, I wanted to discuss just some of the wholly owned or entity owned pharmacies. So some covered entities may have an entity owned pharmacy. As you're probably aware, if you do, you are able to reduce the effect of some of these restrictions. Most of them do not apply to entity owned pharmacies. There's a little bit of additional oversight required. Obviously, you have to have these entities, entity-owned pharmacies registered on OPACE as shipping addresses for each of your locations, and make sure you're recertifying that annually. Other than that, the whole starting of an entity-owned pharmacy can be a bit daunting. But again, we'll talk to that once we get a little bit farther in the presentation. So if we want to talk about what are covered entities doing in the real world about some of these restrictions, we're going to break that down into a few different categories as well. So we'll talk about optimizing pharmacy networks and what that means and what that looks like. We'll talk about how to leverage the different technology platforms that entities have available to them. We'll talk a little bit more about advocacy and negotiation strategies and options for that. And then we'll continue to explore how to deploy entity-owned pharmacies and what the considerations are when doing so. Again, first up, we have optimizing your pharmacy networks. So what does that mean? We call it a pharmacy utilization analysis, in our business when we're working with clients. What it means is you're going to look at all your contract pharmacy actions. So you're going to look at captured claims. You're going to look at encounter reports from your entity, as well as ERX reports. And you should be looking to see what contract pharmacies are being most utilized by your patients. You can break that down and look at that specific to certain manufacturers, because of course you can select different pharmacies for different manufacturers, which can obviously become a little daunting and data intensive. But the goal is to kind of reassess your partnerships, make sure that you're making the right business decisions for your entity in selecting contract pharmacies that will best maximize your program. The other thing to note, when you do select a pharmacy, it's really important that you have conversations with your staff. All your staff members should know who your contract pharmacies are and how to talk to patients about using them. Obviously, patients have choice. They can use whatever pharmacy they want, but that doesn't mean that you can provide education to them. For example, at checkout, instead of saying, okay, Mr. Smith, I see you've been using Bob's Pharmacy down the road. Would you like me to send your refill there? Okay, yep. Well, if Bob's Pharmacy is not one of your contract pharmacies, then the conversation maybe could be a little different. Okay, Mr. Smith, I see that you've been using Bob's Pharmacy in the past. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we actually have a partnership with Jane's Pharmacy here in town. And when you use that pharmacy, you're actually helping our program and helping us help the underserved patients in this area. Would you like to try that pharmacy today? They're really great. Just one little example of the conversations that your staff can have that are hugely impactful at increasing your capture rate and having patients make the decision to use your partner pharmacies. And it's not just at checkout. Every provider, nurse, MA, anyone who touches patients should be aware of who your pharmacies are and how to have these conversations. So we'll go a little bit deeper into analyzing your pharmacy network here. This is just one example of how we do it with our internal dashboard. So we pull in all the captured claims data from your various TPAs, as well as your encounter or ERX data, and mesh that all together into our dashboard. And obviously there's a ton of information on here. What we're focusing on right now is the pharmacy square here, or rectangle. And if we zoom in a bit on that, we can see where your patients are filling their prescriptions currently. We can track that by amount of revenue or amount of claims, number of claims. And that, first of all, helps you narrow down your list when you're selecting a contract pharmacy for your entity. If the list gets smaller and smaller and you're down to one or two pharmacies or two or three pharmacies, and you want to get even more nitty-gritty with it, you can also look at things like patient medication adherence. So if we look down in the bottom right-hand side at that chart, we are tracking 2 different pharmacies for a specific disease state. So let's just select rheumatology. We can see that patients are filling rheumatology medications at these 2 different pharmacies. And the one on the bottom has somewhere around a 50% medication refill rate or adherence rate. And the black line has closer to an 80% medication refill rate. So clearly you would want to select the pharmacy that has a refill reminder program or is conducting business in a way that patients are refilling their medications more appropriately. Just to point out, PDC here means proportion of days covered. It looks at the last 6 months of data, so the last 180 days. If you filled 180 days worth of medications, then you would have a 100% PDC. So I just wanted to point that out. That's how we track adherence. But again, this is just one example of how we do it with clients. But these are the things you should be looking at when making decisions on contract pharmacies. And segueing right into technology platforms, we're going to talk about 340B ESP a little bit and TPA services and how you can utilize them to help manage all this. When 340B ESP first came out, obviously people didn't know what to do with it. It is a very robust system. There's a lot of data in there, and it can be daunting when you first log in and you're first learning how to use it. But the better you are with it, the more you can use it to your advantage. It's not always super accurate. Sometimes it doesn't understand. If you're ordering drugs from a parent site and it doesn't see that, then it's going to tell you that your child sites are getting drugs, but they don't have any prescriptions. All that is an opportunity for you to go in and correct it and make sure that your data is all being recorded appropriately. Again, when this first became a thing, it was more labor intensive. You had to have someone go into your TPA portals, pull the captured claims report, format it into the way that 340B ESP had to ingest it, and then upload it. Now, many of the TPAs will have a canned report for you for ESP, and some of them even take it a step further and actually submit the reports on your behalf. That doesn't mean you can stop paying attention to it. Do not do that. We have seen this happen to covered entities that aren't paying attention, and all of a sudden somebody realizes that they've been paying whack for certain drugs because something happened with their 340B ESP and 340B pricing was turned off for their entity. And next thing you know, they're paying whack pricing, and the longer that goes on, the worse it's going to be to fix it. You have to first of all fix it in 340B ESP, and then you have to go to the wholesaler and do some kind of a credit rebill process where you can get your money back that you paid whack and just pay the 340B pricing. So utilize the technology platforms and maintain your oversight of 340B ESP. We call it wholesaler price verification, where we're going in on a weekly basis and making sure that all the 340B pricing is still there. One other piece of technology here in our dashboard, and again, you can do this anyway, but we do it here in our dashboard, is you can actually select manufacturer, and when you do, you'll see a drop-down box. And if you were looking at all your program revenue and savings and which pharmacies are being utilized, you could select a manufacturer. An example, we have Gilead, and when you do, you're able to see all the data just for that manufacturer. And then you can say, well, this is a pretty big part of our program. We better go ahead and comply with these restrictions. Or maybe it's a small part of your program and you're not that affected by it. And adhering to the restrictions would actually cost you more in administrative costs than you would stand to make in savings. So you might choose to not follow the restrictions on that one. Now we'll talk a little bit about advocacy and negotiation strategies. It's great if you can engage with manufacturers and engage with regulatory bodies to help affect change for the 340B community overall. Obviously, you need to leverage industry coalitions, advocate for policy changes, write to your local politicians, join advocacy groups like Community Voices. They have excellent resources on their websites. They have templates that you can easily write that use to write to your local politicians about 340B. They have marches. If any of you were at the 340B Coalition Conference in DC this summer, and you were marching, we were there marching with you. We've got a couple of Raveneers here and me trying not to die of heat stroke in the background there. But overall, it was a good march. I made it, we all made it, and we got to, feel like we were doing some good for the community. A little bit more about advocacy. You do want to share your 340B success stories. And to me, that's the most impactful way that we can affect change. When legislators or politicians hear from actual patients or hear anecdotes from us about patients, it's moving. And that's the best way that I feel to try to affect change from the ground up, kind of a grassroots change. So continue to try to do that. Kudos to anyone who's in one of the states that is pushing back and passing legislation to restrict the restrictions. We hope to see more of that, continue to come out. Finally, I want to spend some time on entity-owned pharmacies and some considerations around 340B and restrictions. We're going to break that down into in-house pharmacies and talking about how to start one and talking about RX delivery services. So if you have an entity-owned pharmacy already, then good for you. You're probably already doing a good job managing that. And if you don't have one and it seems daunting, it can be, but you need to just think about it the right way, partner with the right vendors to get that going. There's basically 3 options for pharmacies on your site. The first one would be a totally homegrown from scratch pharmacy, where your organization is going to invest the time and money to start a pharmacy from scratch. That includes building out the physical space, contracting with payers, getting credentialed through the state, getting your DEA license, staffing, ordering the inventory, and what have you. That obviously is the biggest lift for your entity. The reward at the end of that tunnel is that you don't have to pay a contract pharmacy anything at the end. You just start operating the business and bring all the savings in, and those savings go back into the entity without having to break a piece off for the pharmacies. The opposite end of that spectrum would be to have a contract pharmacy come on site and do everything themselves. So they're going to do the build out. They're going to do the credentialing, the staffing, the management of the pharmacy. However, that's not really an entity-owned pharmacy. That's not going to help you mitigate restrictions. That will help you increase capture rate and get more patients using your partner pharmacy because they're right there on site. That's very easy. The hybrid model is something in between those two, which we've seen be very successful and really benefit covered entities in this new 340B landscape. And what that looks like is the contract pharmacy vendor will do the build out, they'll manage the pharmacy, they'll do the credentialing, they'll set up the whole pharmacy and staff it. And the covered entity remains the owner of it. So the entity owns the pharmacy and it's run by the contract pharmacy vendor. So that way you're able to mitigate some of the restrictions because they don't apply to entity-owned pharmacies, and you don't have the growing pains or the headache of managing a pharmacy. We've seen that be very successful. Typically, there's no upfront costs to the covered entity. However, the pharmacy will probably make you sign a longer-term deal to make sure that they recoup their investment that they're putting forth into your organization. And finally, I wanted to talk just a bit about delivery. Those of you that have entity-owned pharmacies or will have them in the future, delivery is a great way to get around some of the geographic restrictions. And it's also a great service for your patients. Some of the considerations around delivery, probably the major consideration is cold chain. You will be shipping out cold refrigerated or freezer items. And you have to consider how you're going to do that because you need to be able to track and prove that that medication stayed under the threshold temperature required. If you're going to use FedEx or UPS, bear in mind that if you're sending out something that's expensive and needs to be signed for, and the patient's not home, that package is then going to sit in a warehouse for 1 to 2 days until it can be successfully delivered. That's fine, it's possible. But you have to send it in a cold chain package that has been verified to be stable at 48 or 72 hours. If you're using an internal courier service to do your deliveries instead, it's a little bit easier. You have a little bit more control because the package will go out with your courier service in the morning. If the patient's not home, the package will come back to the pharmacy in the afternoon to be stored appropriately until the next day when delivery is attempted again. And that kind of ties hand in hand with specialty pharmacy networks. If you're operating your own pharmacy and you want your pharmacy to be able to fill specialty prescriptions for certain PBMs, you have to apply to be included in those specialty networks. That usually requires at least 1 or 2 specialty pharmacy certifications, like URAC or ACHC. And applying for those certifications, you'll have to do your cold chain process anyway. So those 2 things kind of go hand in hand, and you want to be aware of those. And I believe we are now at the Q&A session. So let's bring it back, Jen, to help facilitate that.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a few of them. Rob, I actually was putting a lot of our questions in our Ravin Teams chat so that you can get some additional substance. So if you'd like to review that until I get to you. So some of the questions were, can anyone hear Ted? Is Ted muted? Tell Ted to unmute.
Hello.
So beyond that, though, yes, you will all be receiving a copy of the PowerPoint slides. You all will be receiving this actual footage of us recording, and you can make fun of us for not having it, the audio first, but yes, you will be receiving that. So another one that we received, so any thoughts on how to mitigate losses as a covered entity opens their own pharmacies? So you shut off the covered pharmacies, and until you have enough business, it seems that it could be a large loss to start. So we've done this before. We've done this actually several times because of those putting on-site pharmacies into their covered entities, or a pharmacy that's going out of business and having to lose everything. That's the only time that you should really see a loss, is if a pharmacy is going out of business, say it was a small independent pharmacy, but otherwise, what we've done in the past is we keep those contracted pharmacies. We don't get rid of them. Why would you have to get rid of them just because you're putting on an on-site pharmacy? So you go ahead and spend that 6 to 9 months putting in an on-site pharmacy, which was another question that someone had asked, how long? About 6 to 9, pending the state that you're in, the licensures that Rob just spoke about, the board of pharmacy. So it's going to be depending on how much staff you have available to place on it, who you actually hired to help you put in the on-site pharmacy. But you should not remove your contracted pharmacies where your patients are going right now until you are credentialed, your operations are flowing, your policies are written, you have all the licensures that you need for the pharmacy, and then you start your marketing of coming over to your on-site pharmacy. And then eventually you look at your numbers, you look at your claims and say, okay, well, I still have $1 million coming in a year from these one-off pharmacies. Is it worth it to keep it in the program or not? If you're a small grantee, that probably is worth it. If you're a multi-billion-dollar hospital, maybe it's not worth it at that point. So the suggestion is to do an ROI with several calculations of what you're currently doing, because like Rob said, you won't have that dispensation fee anymore, but also look at the other items of don't cancel the contracted pharmacy just yet. Okay, so another question was, what are the largest optimization tactics that Ravin uses with their clients? So we have, like I said before, an optimization tier. Referral capture has been a big one. That's been a big one for several years now, going into covered entities, EMRs, to see where they're referring patients out to and capturing those clients, changing their policies and procedures, onboarding them with the operational flow. And counter analyses is actually where we receive most of our optimization. We see what is not going through and why. Is it because you don't have a pharmacy contracted with you that you should? Did you forget to put in a provider to your TPA? Did your SFTP not go through correctly with the patient information? So we look at every patient that did not go through 340B and try to figure out why. So that's probably the best answer to give to you. Yes, we can say adding on contracted pharmacies, on-site pharmacies, ESP submission, capture referral, many other tactics, but looking at your encounters to see what did not go through and why. And that's where your brainstorming stems from. Ted, this next question is for you. The 340B report said yesterday, oh, you are on the spotlight now, that they spoke with someone from J&J that gave a response on 9/17 letter from HRSA. Can Ted speak to this?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say, whoever asked that question should subscribe, and then they could see exactly what exactly what J&J said in the response. But I'd be happy to summarize what they had to say. They were actually pretty conciliatory in their communication. They basically said that the program has strayed from its original purpose, and that we look forward to working in a conciliatory nature with HRSA on this matter. It was a lot less tough than I expected. I was expecting a lawsuit, and that could still occur by J&J to try to basically require HRSA to allow this to go forward. But perhaps they realize they don't have a very strong case. So that was generally, it was much more conciliatory than I was expecting. So it should be interesting to see if they go ahead and cease and desist, or whether they decide to push the envelope. There was a question too, Jen, I noticed in the questions related to the Sustained 340B Act. I thank you for whoever asked that question. I did skip over the Sustained 340B Act. It is that's the bipartisan bill from the group of 6 in the U.S. Senate. A draft bill was released, but not the final bill. We were all expecting the final bill to be introduced either in August or right when they came back into session here in September. It still hasn't been introduced. I understand there are some last minute squabbles over what should be included in the bill, but it certainly is not a positive sign that with just a few weeks left before they go out and start campaigning, that bill hasn't been introduced yet, because I know Senator Thune, the Republican lead sponsor of the bill, was really hoping to get this bill through during the what's called the lame duck session, which occurs right after the November elections. So the bill has to be introduced in order for that to really happen. So in the void, Senator Welch has introduced this other bill, which is certainly one that's much more focused just on contract pharmacies, but perhaps that will get some momentum in the coming weeks. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Sustain Act does get introduced sometime very soon.
Thank you. Ted, I think this one might be for you, so let's try this. And if not, then Rob. So Florida recently passed litigation that insurers cannot discriminate against pharmacies that mail prescriptions. Is this something that is on the radar for other states?
So the Florida legislation, can you just repeat the question one more time?
Sure. Florida recently passed legislation that insurers cannot discriminate against pharmacies that mail prescriptions. Is this something that is on the radar for other states?
I would not be shocked at all. I'm sure the pharmacies in other states are trying to get this type of legislation enacted. This is really not a 340B question, but generally when you see a bill in one state, you're going to see it in another state very soon after, because these advocates work closely from state to state, and often these bills are generated actually in Washington or at the national level, and they serve as model bills for other states. Anything you want to add to that? I know you're Floridian, both of you, so perhaps you have some unique perspectives.
Honestly, I agree with that. Unfortunately, what happens is when one manufacturer does something, everyone follows suit. When one state does something, they seem to follow suit. So I've heard too many people say, well, let's just forget the 340B program. And I've been hearing that since 2010. So, and I've helped companies make in the billions of dollars off of 340B. So don't listen to all the rumor mills that you hear. Just keep moving forward with your 340B program. Keep optimizing it to the best that you can. You have to obviously follow compliance, and I don't know what's going to happen with everyone else, but we continue to optimize and follow compliance of the program and just steer forward. Okay, so, I wish we had like another hour for all these questions. Okay, so this one could be an hour-long topic, but new data requirements for 340B ESP are unreasonable. Not even a question. I get it though. Thoughts on the new requirements? So maybe Rob, if you could talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, they are unreasonable. We're hoping that, when, for those of you who don't know, that the DSCSA is going live November 1st. And that's only going to make things even more tricky because one of their new requirements is that you have to have a serialization number. And that's the first thing we thought when we saw that was, what the heck is that? How do we get that? Where does it come from? And unfortunately, we don't really know yet because it's not in play. It's concerning that other manufacturers may follow suit as well. But that is one that we are kind of playing it by ear right now. It's not in practice yet enough that we have had to deal with it a whole lot. I wish I had more to say about it. It's just it's extremely unreasonable, and we're going to manage it the best we can, just like all the covered entities that we work with.
Yeah, I know that there is a letter that was just sent from one of the law firms, Hall Render, to all the drug manufacturers expressing concerns with the new 340B ESP terms, and I think threatening a lawsuit. So that might be helpful. It certainly can't hurt to be active and vocal, both with the attorneys that you work with and your congressional and state representatives, because the more they hear about these challenges, the more likely these challenges will be resolved. I know that both Jen and Rob talked about the importance of advocacy. It's critically important in the world of 340B, just like in any other subject, but particularly in this area. So be active. And I saw someone ask a question regarding Hawaii, and we have a real problem because of this geographic restriction. And my answer to that would be talk to your Hawaii delegation, your congressional delegation. Bring these issues up. That's the way to try to get things done and to shake some heads around here.
And Ravin is definitely looking for a client in Hawaii. Rob and I talk about that all the time. So
I was going to say, it looked to me like it was in a beautiful island. I don't know which island it was, but check the questions. There was definitely one from an island in Hawaii that's having trouble with this geographic restriction.
I actually saw about 20 more questions, and unfortunately we don't have the time, which is like, maybe like I wish we would have kept like 45 minutes for questions, but if that would have happened, there would have been none. So what I'm hoping to do is that we're going to save all of your questions, Miss Deanna, and my team will actually be reaching out to you with answers to those questions. And if any work for you, Ted, I'm going to send them to you. But amazing questions, great questions, and I will get back to you. I promise you on that. But I think that concludes our first webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you have our email, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in Buffalo, whoever's going to be there.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.